certainly don't speak on behalf of the House of Justice, but as a fellow Baha'i, sharing ideas from the teachings, I think is something that's very important for us to do. And I have had the privilege of traveling around quite a bit and seeing some Baha'i communities around the world, which has been very inspiring and helpful. I just met some people who've been at the International Convention as delegates in Haifa, and they were saying that it was a totally life-changing convention. The news coming back from there is especially encouraging, a whole new level of maturity, very few pioneers in sight. All the NSAs were made up of native peoples, sometimes people from opposite warring tribes. The Africans particularly, they noticed, were people that would never be together in a natural circumstance of their country at the present time, but were there together. And a good representation of women. One friend who said had been at convention since '83, at which time 2 women spoke at the International Convention, Ria Ghanum and Zina Sarabji from India. That was all. But this time they said about 40 to 45% of the offerings, the things people had to say, came from women. Articulate, cogent, and that there was a kind of continuity to the consultation that they hadn't seen in previous conventions, rather than just a little anecdotal things. Of course, there are a lot of inspiring stories that the delegates tell when they go, recount from their own countries. But the general impression that it was remarkable is it says that this plan is working very, very well around the world in so many places, except here. They did that remark. We're just catching up here. We had our old ideas about what we could do, what we couldn't do, and it's just taking a long time to adapt. But these core activities that the House of Justice set out are really, they're a road to growth and understanding and cohesion and coherence at the local level. So you need to keep experimenting with them, multiplying the core activities and so on. But the House of Justice, even when I met with them a year and a half ago, they were very keen about adding other things in. They said there's no reason, they had never excluded firesides in any messages they wrote, but the way that the different representatives of the faith understood concentrate all your attention on the goals of the plan meant the exclusion of some things, and since firesides weren't there, they just started defeating the firesides, really. Now, there's an effort, the National Assembly itself is sending around people in the larger clusters to promote firesides or quasi-firesides. You don't want to call them firesides because the Friends do not have a kind of knee-jerk reaction sometimes to firesides. They are informational meetings. That is, meetings that in the course of the evening, the gatherings, the seeker, the visitor, can get an overview of the faith, which is fairly substantial in character and hopefully inspired by the teachings themselves. And that then from that you can decide, and this was discussed here at our National Convention also, then you decide what might be the appropriate path for this person, the seeker that you meet and talk with, the friends, members of the assemblies, others meet them, or the host of the gathering, and encourage what might be the next step. The next step may be right into a study class, or it may be into Book 1 of Ruhi, or it may be back to more informational meetings where there's questions and answers that they can ask. In other words, it's not rigid, even though somebody will come and tell you, well, that doesn't fit on the statistical sheet. It doesn't make a difference. We have certain responsibilities that I wanted to kind of emphasize also this evening to Baha'u'llah that transcend our collective activities and become the center of our being able to serve faithfully the collective activities of the community and the responsibilities that we have in that sense. I don't know whether that title got announced, that something about individual and collective responsibilities in service to the faith. Was that announced? All right, so I'll try to include that. So I find there's a tendency to adopt new ways of seeing things that we have to be careful. We check back against what's in the teachings about this. For instance, I've heard in different places people saying, we've come beyond conversion. We don't have conversion emphasized in the faith. Or we don't have conversion emphasized in the faith anymore, which is true. Nobody's emphasizing it. We have no growth. In the United States, we have zero growth as to new Baha'is. We don't have new Baha'is. So we need to, the House is concerned that we attract new manpower. How can we multiply all our activities the way they want if we don't have a steady flow of people coming into the faith that want to be Baha'is? I find that very contradictory in the sense that Baha'u'llah says the first duty, O peoples of the world, hello, first duty that anybody has is the recognition of the manifestation of God. Now, in order to fulfill that responsibility, they've got to hear something about it. And we're the ones that are supposed to be telling them. Once they've heard, they're in trouble. I mean, it's a terrible burden. From the writings, there's some very serious things you don't want to oppose. The Bab says, bad enough if you ignore it and to pay no attention. The worst possible position is if you start to oppose it and speak against it. There is no other purpose in existence except the recognition of the manifestation of God. As far as I can understand from the writings, when we say there is no God but God, this means giving up worship of ourself and our own rights and privileges and position in life and society, and bringing ourselves gradually, with the help of God, to a realization of our powerlessness, so that we begin to manifest these hidden gifts that are in the soul that Baha'u'llah says are in us, and that if we have the right attitude, start coming out. And when they come out, he said, that's when people will be attracted to the faith. And they won't be attracted probably otherwise. First thing he says is teach yourself. You recognize the faith, then you have to teach yourself. When you've taught yourself the faith, he says, then arise and speak. Well, there's always a give and take in this process, because we're encouraged to start teaching in other passages very early on. And I find this can be resolved by one of the tablets that Baha'u'llah cites in the Gleanings, that's quoted by Shoghi Effendi in the Gleanings, where he says that it's the first duty of every soul to proclaim the cause of God to everyone. If they show interest, if they are interested, then teach them. Hear that? This is the order. Proclaim and teach. So proclamation is different from teaching. Proclamation, then, thinking about it, let's see if you arrive at the same conclusion, it means allowing people to know that there is such a figure as Baha'u'llah who's come and has established a new faith, has issued a new teaching from God, and he's calling all mankind to follow it. It brings the solutions to the problems we face in life. And then you find the person either asking, I never heard of that. What is that? Sometimes on the airplanes I say, you've never heard of it? That's very strange. Very seldom I meet people who haven't heard of it. You better go on Baha'i.org and find out what it is. Or they say to you, oh, I'm so happy you found something you like. Which is really the basis of this materialistic outlook on life right now, that you should decide what your faith should be, and you decide what spirituality means to you. And you can, Riyaganov said, it's like shopping in the supermarket. You go in and you pick out the laws and teachings you like, and the rest you leave on the shelves. No, that's not that's not the way to become a Baha'i. The embrace has to be complete. But we have to lead people gradually, and I think part of the teachings of the cause is to give everybody time. Shoghi Effendi says in a letter to an individual, he says, it takes a long time to become a Baha'i. Amen, right? I think we all can agree with that quite completely. Very challenging, very challenging. And even up to your last breath, you don't know whether you quite got there or not. So letting people know that a faith exists which offers solutions to mankind and has been brought by someone who claims to be a messenger of God is a kind of essential message that we need to get across. I remember when I was a new Baha'i back in the 50s, the friends said that they had heard Abdu'l-Baha, and I can't find a quotation for this, but it makes good sense. If you're going to see somebody only once, deliver the message. Get this essential proclamation that there is such a thing. And if you're going to see them more than once, live the life. Show Baha'i kindness. Because, you just move in, somebody's moving into the apartment down the hall from you, and the first time you see you rush up and ask them if they've heard of Baha'u'llah, and say, oh my God, the neighbors are crazy, and you gotta kind of weigh what you're doing, So I thought that was very sound advice, but sometimes it's pretty hard. You're not with people that you're going to meet only once for very long, oftentimes. What to do on the airplane sitting next to I got to deliver the message to this, whoever it is sitting next to me, and sometimes it doesn't happen until we stand up at the end of the flight when you say, wish them well, and do they live here or something, and get started. Sometimes I ask them, do you know, they're from such and such a city. Oh, I said, do you know the Baha'is in that city? The what? Usually every city. Or maybe they've heard of it, but mostly they haven't. So then that wakes them up. And I also have a business card, and on the back of the business card I have a stamp which says Baha'i.org, that I say, we've usually talked about painting and, the normal things you would have liked of your own experience. And then I offer them a card, and I say, you can find out information about this. And it's helpful, I think, for everybody to know about this. Now, Shoghi Effendi in a letter says that if you mention the name of Baha'u'llah and Baha'i, these names have a magnetic power. They go into the subconscious. It's the only letter I've seen where Shoghi Effendi talks about subconscious. They go into the subconscious of the person, and they work there. And they move the person towards hearing it again, because the first time you hear it, it's oftentimes strange, needs a couple of hits. The next time you find out that cousin Judy is a Baha'i, my God, I didn't know that. Or her neighbor is a Baha'i. Or then you hear the Baha'is are being persecuted in Iran. And it starts to add up till you say, well, I wonder what this thing is, And especially if they've had the seeds planted there. So this is one way we can help. And this is an individual activity that we have to be aware of all the time. Another letter of the Guardian, in one of the last years, 56, I think it is, to an individual, he said, if the Baha'is would live the Baha'i life, Baha'u'llah would send souls to them. Now, for those of you that don't like to go and knock on doors, there's another solution here. It's a very challenging one, but it's worth putting our time into. We will attract people if we deepen ourselves, immerse ourselves in the ocean of his teachings, and try to live a Baha'i life. Then Baha'u'llah is watching to see who is it safe to send somebody to. Can you imagine? Otherwise, we can abort the process. So that's the challenge. As an individual, apart from cycles of growth and various timing of collective activities in the community, we have a 24-hour-a-day mandate from Baha'u'llah to teach the cause and to think about teaching the cause and to pray to find waiting souls. Much easier if we find waiting souls than if we shouldn't not speak to others, but in the course of things, if we pray for waiting souls, maybe every morning we say, give me a chance to meet someone who will be receptive to the faith, who needs the faith, who wants the faith. There's all kinds of angels busy in all of these interactions, that we don't see and hear about. But he says, gradually you'll become aware of the influence when they're just spreading around the grace that comes when you recite the words of God in the privacy of your chambers. These angels are busy distributing it to other souls. Something's building up. And something's happening with the progressive revelation of the Son of Baha'u'llah's truth. It's rising in the world. So it's the youth and the children that are being born now, they're closer to it than we were when we came in. Everything is changing from that point of view. I saw some extraordinary diary notes of Keith Ransom Kaler. She'd been in Haifa in the 30s, late 30s. She was there. Shoghi Effendi had invited her to come. She was on pilgrimage first, and then she stayed after pilgrimage for nearly 4 months. And he prepped her for a mission to Iran, to visit the authorities in Iran, to try to get permission for the distribution of Baha'i literature amongst the Baha'is and the freedom for the Baha'is and so on. So they talked about everything. And one of the startling things she found so startling, she said, I had to get a grip on myself. Shoghi Effendi said, do you think the kingdom of God being established on earth, Baha'u'llah's kingdom, is dependent on what the Baha'is do or don't do? Not a bit, he said. They can make all the mistakes they want. It will have no influence. The powers have been released by the Bab and Baha'u'llah to bring mankind to its oneness and to the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth. Everybody's going to suffer more if the Baha'is don't do their part. They have a part. So she said, well, what are we doing? Why are we making such efforts if that's the truth? He said, it's for you. Your future, your destiny depends, having come into life at this time, having recognized the faith, to arise and serve it and sacrifice yourself. And there needs to be it's like a leaven in the world, apart from the leaven that comes from the other side, a leaven in the world which also helps to lift mankind. And he said, though it won't affect whether the kingdom comes or not, it can assuage, that is, soften the suffering of mankind, the growth of the faith in the world. So it has a special role. But most of it is to prepare us for our heavenly voyage and so on, which is not selfish, because that's what God wants. You say, okay. So individually we need to be thinking about how to connect with souls, how to love them, how to produce the oneness of mankind, how to heal rifts between peoples and policies and parties and all kinds of things that are going on. And then, with that spirit of attraction, take part in our collective activities. But I don't know what your experience here is, but I'm finding people, they don't say so in meetings, they're polite, but they come up and say, everybody's burned out, the people are burned out. They're burned out because the individual covenant that they have with Baha'u'llah is not being strengthened and drawn on. And they're trying to get their life's blessings from collective activities. And their idea of service gets reduced down to something that they consider a social service or something that might be a good for others. But because of the materialistic outlook of our society at this time, they overlook one of the phrases in the Gleanings. Baha'u'llah says the most praiseworthy act in the sight of God is his praise. When you praise him, that's the greatest thing you can do. What? Yes. And the other action that he says is high on the list of God's good pleasure and pleasing unto him, and increases your love for him, is the regular use and recitation of the obligatory prayer. Well, you say, well, what kind of service is that for the community? But when you go back to this part in the beginning of the prayer book, to when you recite the verses of God with sincerity and so on, it diffuses grace. It gives blessing to the people around. But since we don't see it, we don't think about it. Or we think, that's nice, poetic, beautiful poetic passage. I love that passage. It's so sweet. There's a tablet, there's a verse in the Quran which talks about, I'm going to be in trouble after this, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. It's published, it's not translated. It says, O Baha'u'llah, what is the meaning of the verse in the Quran where it says, talks about the services of the 4 winged angels, 6 winged angels, and 2 winged angels? What does this refer to? And Baha'u'llah says, this refers to different degrees of angels and their services. And he implies that almost half the service of the souls that are awakened spiritually, that go to the other world, relates back to this world, helping those concourse on high, the hosts of angels that are, I mean, if we were all teaching, it would really have them all occupied, wouldn't it? But I don't think they get used very much. So even he said they're under pressure in the other world because we don't draw on them enough. That was something he said to the pilgrims. He said, it's there, you just open your mouth in there with the right spirit and out comes this terrific power and force. Why don't we draw on it? I'm busy asking myself the same question now. Why don't we draw on it more? Why can't we have more effect? Anyway, he goes on in this tablet and he says, okay, well, the two four-winged angels, first talks about the four-winged of this. He said they're the lowest grade of angel, and they're assigned, each one of them is assigned to each one of you, to each one of the people in the world, and they note down everything that they say and do. Everything. I thought to myself, I wonder if there's a divine erasure. That's a few things I'd like to remove from the record, but I'm sure we all have that kind of feeling. So they're constantly with you. Angels assigned to you. They ask about guardian angels. They asked Abdul-Baha during his lifetime. And I don't have a text for it, but we have notes from the secretaries when that was asked. Are there guardian angels? And Abdul-Baha said there are all kinds of forces surrounding the Baha'is individually. And if they were to be removed for even an instant, the soul would be immediately destroyed. So we don't realize to what extent we've got the evil whisperer on one side, and we've got the angels suggesting and insinuating things in our consciousness, arts and sciences flowing down out of that kingdom into our thoughts, which we then possess for ourselves and announce myself as the inventor of I don't know what. It's all. One of the interesting things is about the great inventions of the last 100 years is they've appeared in a number of places all at once, so that the nations are fighting with who was the first nation to fly. We say, well, we know it was us, here, but Russia has a different point of view, and Germany has another one, and there were people all over the world, and each one of the scientific breakthroughs, it's when God decides, I don't know if he's got billions of planets to deal with civilizations and people and manifestations appearing in them, as far as I can see in the writings. Take a deep breath. But somehow through the whole process, there is a timing, and it's God's will is passing in to what new inventions, new developments are appropriate for the time we live in. And Baha'u'llah says in the Tablet of Wisdom, he said, we give gifts of this nature to a people, and then we take them away sometimes. He said, we gave them to the Greeks, and we took them away. Think of the Greeks since the heyday of the Greeks. Not much happening, So this is it's a special blessing of God. That's all in His hands. So much of the invisible world is connected with what we're doing. So much of what we do is not connected to the spiritual world because we live in a society dominated by materialistic outlooks. And if you think materialism is just the desire to acquire goods and things, of course that's one dimension of it. But it also underlies this whole agnostic, atheistic attitude towards existence. If you can't prove it to me, if I can't see it, is it really true? And science then assumes the role of the creator, so to speak, or the revealer, rather than the manifestation of God. It's something we need to think a lot about, I think. The Guardians, they told me in the Holy Land, he mentioned over and over to the pilgrims that materialism is the greatest enemy of the faith. Think of that. Because through materialism, people have lost interest in religion. They don't need it. My happiness depends on whether I'm rich and how my friends view me. And spirituality and spiritual values are not counting anymore. That's why so many people are not interested in religion. Well, they'll tell you, I think that religion has made a big mess in the world. And of course, pseudo-religion and religion off the path is a terrific source of problems for us. So we can hardly mention the word religion. We have to start and redefine it for people. What do we mean by the religion? Otherwise, religion sounds like, some fascist priests ruling mankind, telling what they can do and punishing them if they don't do it. And the whole history of it is so grim that people have thrown away the holy books along with these false ideas. And so one has to kind of agree with agnostics and atheists. You're in a very sound position. You really don't know, and you say that's what you don't know. And I had similar feelings. I think we all did. We all have had at certain times. But we move forward and we see that rationality is the greatest gift that man has, the gift of understanding. A human being uses that, and when he approaches the words of God, the revelation, it's an illuminating experience, and it confirms them and raises us in a whole new level of consciousness that we need in order to sort out all these things that are coming to us. Look at what comes to the kids in school, which now with an education that doesn't allow the mention of God. I think I heard somebody's being sued. One of the teachers say, "You have a blessed day," to another teacher, and they're in court over it. Very strange. Shoghi Effendi said the pendulum, he talks about this pendulum. It goes too far one way, and then it starts to swing back, and it goes too far the other way, and gradually it comes to a middle. So we have this extreme, and it probably isn't finished. We'll probably have a phase here where if parents are caught teaching prayer to their children, they'll be jailed or the children will be taken away. It happened in the Soviet Union already, and it's not as if it can't happen to human beings. We have a different feeling about ourselves here, but fascism is a strange force when it gets going. And there'll be a time, Dr. Vargas said he heard from his grandfather that the Baha'u'llah said that the world will turn against religion entirely and try to stamp it out everywhere. And then they'll come to find that they can't do that. First they'll think it's the cause of all the wars, and they'll be pretty right. And then the next thing is stamp it out. But then they see they can't. And even the Chinese, for example, are approaching what to do about the ethical dimension of man, his behavioral the forces that can lead to his having an uplifting vision of life and helping other people and succoring other people. All of this is there. Then he said they'll realize they can't get along without it, and they'll look at all the existing teachings and they'll adopt the Baha'i teachings. They'll bring them to the center, to the core. Now, one of the things in convention that the friends mentioned, the International Convention, is that the Baha'is were talking about how the government was coming to them, asking them to spread more of their classes and more of their devotional meetings and more of so it's in the grassroots out in the world. It seems to be better viewed than here, where we have a more complicated society and restrictions in the way church and state are divided traditionally here. So action, we need to think about action. It's not necessarily material action. We're told that we need to build an ever-advancing civilization. But we just get that much of it. What's the rest of the story? Look back to the talks of Abdu'l-Baha. He talks about civilization. He said civilization has two wings, material progress and spiritual progress. He says right now, the material progress is in ascendancy and it's taking care of itself. Don't worry about it. Concentrate on spiritual civilization. Concentrate on enlivening people to use virtues, to use divine qualities, to express the spirituality that's inherent in Baha'u'llah's message. This is urgent in order to check the material progress so that it's the right kind of material progress, because he says if not, it leads to materialism, it leads to undreamt of instruments of war. So when we're called to action, we should remember that our principal action is a spiritual action. It seems to me that we need to think about that and not conceive action. There are those that are saying that all study and reading of the writings should be followed by action. But the action then becomes social action. It becomes a material, help the lady across the street, clean up the garden, the park, or things of that sort. Help to plant some new trees. All those things are good. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not material actions. They're spiritual actions too. But the idea is that we need to think more that the service that we can do to humanity, that we're called to do, is sharing the message and its content. And that becomes more spontaneous if we take the time to study the writings. And there's other letters from the Guardian. He says that a Baha'i's life consists of two things: study and service. Study and teaching. The greatest service of all, of course, is teaching. At this phase, when we've got so many people that don't know what the faith is, teaching is the top priority. Then we have an institute process, we have study circles. This was created and encouraged by the different assemblies when the House of Justice said we need an institute process, and that institute process should bring the fundamental verities of the cause to the new Baha'is. I was sitting there when this was all conceived, friends. It was to help the people who are Baha'is that don't know what's going on in the faith and don't understand it. So there were various attempts in different countries to create a program. The one that was most successful was the Ruhi system, and after some years after that statement of the House suggested adopting that until we have another experience, whatever it is. I don't know how that'll be in the future. Let's move ahead with this. But then, because we didn't have any new Baha'is, all of the old Baha'is were put into the Ruhi process. And some of them knew a whole lot more than what was in the Ruhi process, and it was a painful thing to hear that you didn't know it and you couldn't serve the cause and you couldn't teach if you hadn't done the Ruhi books. In fact, you can't be a pioneer in this new plan if you don't have some experience with it. And it makes sense. We're not above the institute courses, even if we know a lot about the faith. We should at least know what their shape is and what their significance is, so that we understand how to encourage people in taking part in them. But I think we have to think about these things. And another thing Shoghi Effendi said is, writing to new Baha'is, he said, it's so important that you immerse yourself in the literature of the cause, that you study it thoroughly and in a concentrated way, not just casual reading. And he said he hopes you'll find a couple hours a day to read the Word of God. What would happen to the Baha'i world if the Baha'is all spent a couple hours a day reading the Baha'i world? We'd probably die young because we're so exhausted with all the things we're doing. But, I'm the last one to tell you to do this, because I say, I'm free, I'm retired, and I paint once in a while, but I've got lots of time. Let me sit down for the 2 hours, and I sit down, and in 10 minutes, I'm asleep. This is part of the tragedy. So if you're young and you have more energy, try to invest now in this process, because it lasts you your whole life. It's very important, acquiring a clear vision of the writings. And the writings, Baha'u'llah says in one place, he said, the verses of God reveal the meaning of the verses of God. In the sense that the more you read something in another book, it illumines this verse. And you read this prayer in prayers and meditations, and it clears up something in the gleanings. But it requires immersing yourself in these writings and thinking about them. Now, if you look at the letters of Shoghi Effendi, he talks about different degrees of study. At first, he talks about reading the writings, read and reread the writings. He asked some Western Baha'is at the Pilgrim table if they'd read the Agon, and one man said he'd done it. And Shoghi Effendi didn't say anything, but the next group of Baha'is, he said, there was a man here who said he'd done the Agon. You can't do the Agon, he said. It doesn't do it. You have to keep studying it over and over again. And every time we approach the writings, even a week later, we're in a different trajectory. We're moving in new ways, and we'll see new things in the writings. So it's not as if we ever finish reading. I finished that book, and I'm going to do this book. Yes, okay, we have to keep reading the whole spectrum of them. But this is read and reread. Then he says the next thing you have to painstakingly study the writings. Painstakingly sounds like it's going to hurt a little bit. It's going to take away from our time to do other things that we like to do and that we're habituated to. Okay, so where are we going to find the time to study the writings of this way every day? Then he says in another, he says that eventually the key books, and he mentions key books at that time when he was writing these letters, we didn't have Gleanings yet. When Gleanings came out, he added that, but it was the Gone and Some Answered Questions, principally those two, and the Dawnbreakers, and then the Gleanings, and Prayers and Meditations, and I would add God Passes By especially. I've got World Order Letters and Advent and all these other things of the writings of the Guardian, but of the straightforward writings of the faith. And he said these books should be digested. That's an interesting word, isn't it? Assimilated, digested. And then he said, finally, their contents should be thoroughly mastered by the Baha'is, so that when they speak of the faith, they speak of the faith, not something else. My favorite teaching in the faith is this or is that. He said, first stage of a teacher is they bring up the faith, they mention their favorite teaching no matter what the position of the other person is or their place in life. I always speak about universal language. That's the Baha'i faith for me, you know. How to get a balance. It's the second stage of a Baha'i teacher is that they get the teachings right, but they're in their own words. Third stage, highest stage of a Baha'i teacher is they get it right, but they have words memorized, passages, key passages memorized from the Gone and from the so that's of course when questions come up, they can quote that. Shoghi Effendi says, of course, this is the greatest and most effective tool is when you actually cite the writings. And you look back to Abdul Baha, and he makes such an effort to have the Baha'is, for instance, concentrate on hidden words. Memorize the hidden words. Some of you have heard of Helen Bishop? Some of you have heard the name Helen Bishop? Yes, a few people. Helen Bishop was a Baha'i back in the 30s, and she was asked by Shoghi Effendi to write the introduction to his English publication of the Gone. A Western woman, university trained. She traveled internationally. She was very effective in spreading the cause. And she was going on pilgrimage. And she tells a story on herself. I hope you did. Anyway, she says, you know, when I was going to go to the Holy Land, I thought, I have to have some really meaty questions for Shoghi Effendi, that he can see what kind of things I think about. And so she said she had a whole list of questions ready to go, and she went to the Holy Land. And she said she was so warmly greeted by Shoghi Effendi, as he does the newly arrived pilgrim. He greets them and puts them on his right-hand side at the table. And she said then he sat down and he started talking and greeting and asking questions of everybody at the table. Never looked at me once, never asked me anything. As time is going on, she said, I'm getting so nervous and I'm feeling so bad. And then she says, oh, she said, my questions. I should not have come with questions. I should come ready to listen. This is the wrong attitude. Why did I do that? And just as she was thinking that, she said, Shoghi Effendi turned to her and he said, Mrs. Bishop, I'm sure you must have some questions. At which point she said, I couldn't remember any of them. But the next night she said, I remembered one of them and I thought this is worthy of asking and doesn't have anything to do with me. How can I improve my teaching, the teaching work that I'm trying to do? And she said, I had a few ideas of what he might answer, but I was not prepared at all for what he said. He said, Mrs. Bishop, you should memorize the hidden words. Then those phrases will come out in your talks and in your conversations with people and will have a great influence. So that's something to think about. See, Mr. Khadim, the hand of the cause, was in Geyserville years ago when I was a youth, and we sat under the tree with him, and asked him to tell us whatever he wanted, and he said, you should memorize the writings. So he said, what should you memorize? And he said, well, first, Kitab gone. Western kids, we almost passed out, I think. I was so struck. Well, finally, he whittled him down. He said, well, epistles of Son of the Wolf. No. Tablets to the Kings? Didn't see any reaction there. Finally, he said, well, Tablet of Carmel? And those of us that knew that was 5 or 6 pages, we said, well, that would be something we could try. And a number of the youth did memorize the Tablet of Carmel. I memorized it for 2 weeks. And then it was gone again. Not knowing I was going to be living on Mount Carmel in the future, my goodness. So this question of really studying the writings, absorbing the writings, is what helps transform us. Because the more we study the writings, the more, Shoghi Effendi says, we will see that our previous ideas were erroneous. Straightforward, he says it like that. Because we'll see the truths of the faith. And this is the gift that Baha'u'llah has given us all. We don't want to sell ourselves short, nor sell the faith short. And Shoghi Effendi has quoted Baha'u'llah in so many places, and it's there in the passages that he's translated in the gleanings, that once the friends absorb the teaching, live the teachings, and live the life, their words will take effect in the hearts of their listeners. Otherwise, he says, there will be no effect whatever. So, if we hear ourselves saying, as we sometimes strangely do, I can't find anybody interested in the faith. They're not interested. When I talk about it, they don't want to hear about it. What does that suggest to us? We should go back and think about this verse of Baha'u'llah that says we have to prepare ourselves in a different way so that our words will affect them. Abdu'l-Baha doesn't call on us to go forth and hand out books and pamphlets. What does he do in the divine plan? We're supposed to be executing the divine plan now. He says we should breathe life into the hearts of others. And then he says, how can the poor give to the poor? We need to enrich ourselves so that our words will be effective, and these gems of the faith will be passed on and change the people. This is our eternal covenant. It's the great covenant that we have, that Baha'i has made with us, that through following his teachings, God will bless us and sustain us. And then Baha'u'llah says there's a lesser covenant, and that's the covenant with the Master. And through the Master with the administrative order, and through the administrative order with the guardian, and with the house of justice. But this one's dependent on the first one. So we want to have them all together. Both of them are of great importance. But do we have the right balance in our lives? Are we busy doing activities, superficial activities, and not achieving the influence on the souls that we need to? And how can we remedy that? Now, Shoghi Effendi says there's 4 steps to success in Baha'i service. Prayer, meditation, study of the writings, and action. And the 4th, it says, depends on the quality of the 3, the first ones. Look how much inner work is done so that the outer work is effective. Then he talks about, of course, you know, there's different compilations the house is prepared on prayer, on meditation, on study, on action, on teaching. There's no time to be able to go into all of that tonight. But at the end of that, he also sends a letter, and he says that what we want to do, what we may desire to do, and the very progress of the growth of the cause depends on sacrifice. Sacrifice is the fuel of the faith. It makes it go forward. So we really want to think, how can we do this, you know? It's like petrol in the car. If there's no petrol in the car, it doesn't go anywhere. What is the sacrifice that the faith requires of us? He says, financial sacrifice. This is the first of the 3, that we should give generously to the funds. I used to tell the friends, till somebody told me that's not wise to say that, that we should give to the fund even if we knew that the assembly burns the money afterwards. Because it's not, we're not giving it so that to see how it will be effectively spent. That's not our business, that's the assembly's business. That's the House of Justice business. Okay, we say, how many of these youth have been sponsored and for a year of activity in the field? What kind of cost is that, you know? Yeah, not our business. Our business is to give till it hurts, to give generously to the fund. In consultation, we can raise some questions. That's all right. That's where we have the possibility of saying, I don't like that you're burning my money. But otherwise, this is something between us and Baha'u'llah. He wants us to sacrifice financially for the means that he provides us. And he gives a measurement there with the hukuk for those that are making the proper quantity of income. What do you suppose the other two are? Two other categories of sacrifice. Time is the second one. Time is a big one because we don't have time. We filled up all our time. I'm busy with this, I'm busy with that. I mean, you know, I have to take care of the kids, I have to do this, I have to go to work, we don't have any time. Can you have time for this project? No, I don't have any time. Or I'd like to, but, you know, I'm not able to. We have to sacrifice time from other things that hurts. And that's very good for us and good for the cause. That's the kind of thing that fuels the cause, makes it go forward. If we can consider that. We have to weigh the factors of our life. Nobody can tell us how much time we should give. These are, again, this is part of this individual covenant with Baha'u'llah. And the third one is person. Sacrifice yourself, your person, and your goals in life of what you think you should be and how you should do and what I want to achieve, all of which are worthy, but some of it has to be sacrificed in order for that energy to go into the service of the cause and move mankind forward at this moment when the most urgent thing is that more souls should hear in a clear way about the existence of the cause if the Baha'i community is going to go forward. Never mind the kingdom of God. Seems that that's in other hands already, so that's wonderful. So and then we have to examine ourselves, you know, do I need the fourth master's degree? Do I need this? Do I need that? I don't know. What holds us up? Do I really? No, I can't get along without a fishing holiday every year. I don't have that problem, but maybe somebody else does. So I'm fishing myself here. You asking yourselves, how can I sacrifice my person more than I'm already sacrificing my person? Some of that sacrifice is sacrifice of our children. Well, that's a terribly difficult theme. We don't want to ever sacrifice our children, but we need to sacrifice our children. Some of the suffering comes to children because we're serving the cause, or because we go to pioneer in a place and we think somehow that's going to, set the children back. Let's go pioneering to some really primitive place. There's no decent schooling. There's nothing. I haven't seen pioneer kids that have lost anything much in traveling around. I've never seen pioneers that starve to death. They get hungry. I got hungry. It's possible, but basically you get through it somehow. It's wonderful. I met some pioneers that were in a place called Equatorial Guinea, where it was opened to the faith by a Texan, a housewife, who left her husband to go be a Knight of Baha'u'llah in this place, but they kicked her out of as soon as they found out she was there. She's passed away. She's buried in the Sierras here in Grass Valley. Wonderful stories of people who are the most unlikely carriers of Baha'u'llah's faith, who sacrificed person, who went out and did these things, made an extraordinary history for the cause. The question of spirituality is a very important one in our own lives and in the lives of our children, and I recommend to you a letter from Shoghi Effendi. Let's see if I can quote it for you here. Better. I don't see it here in front of me. I think I've got the wrong compilation, but I'll try to send it to your assembly here, the quotation. It's written about youth, and it's about spirituality, saying that especially in this time of such strong materialistic influences, that the youth need to be taught to pray. They need to know how to turn to their Maker, and that much of them are in terrible suffering, and so much of our work is directed to youth because they don't have any concept of the existence of a Maker that loves them. They don't realize that they didn't make themselves and that they're dependent in this. And so he encourages the youth to pay particular attention to prayer. And I'm always very encouraged moving around in youth gatherings where they're trying to organize, get volunteers to do the junior youth work or whatever it is. There'll be a round of prayers that are so sincere and so moving that you realize that this thing is whatever adjustments has to be made into making it fit society here and so on, and what's useful and what's not useful. This prayer, this movement of prayer, is very, very confirming and essential for the work. So that's just the question of don't lose sight of the nature of spirituality. It's the opposite of this materialism that we have. What is Shoghi Effendi? How does he call materialism? He characterizes it, and I'm just taking these pieces separately from various messages. He characterizes it as crass, gross, rampant, cancerous, all-pervasive, pernicious, relentless, excessive, binding, enervating, brutal, destructive, blind and intense, and that people are enfeebled by the miasma of materialism, the undertow of materialism, the cesspool of materialism, good Lord, the pitfalls of materialism. What a condemnation, no? In case we thought it was just nice material progress. How much it influences everything around us, and how much it influences our loved ones, our children. And how do we create a higher vision for them that doesn't sound fanatic? We're supposed to teach them the love of God in a way, Baha'u'llah says, it doesn't produce fanaticism. It has to be rational, it has to be together with science, it has to be with discovery of the signs of God in all the things that are around us, our own wonder about that. Will ye not see the signs of God in yourself and the universe? Is one of the statements of Muhammad in the Quran. And Baha'u'llah, how much he stresses that. And in the prayers he asks us, begged, that we could witness the signs of his greatness, of his sovereignty in all things. So our own vision expands. Our own love for him expands. Our own willingness to be his and not ours. It's a major challenge. One more quotation I wanted to share from The Guardian here. Hope I will be more successful in finding it. The gross materialism that engulfs the entire nation, this was written, of course, to America, at the present hour. The attachment, by the way, he said, materialism was born in Europe, raised in America, and exported to the whole world. The gross materialism that engulfs the entire nation at the present hour, the attachment to worldly things that enshrouds the souls of men, the fears and anxieties that distract their minds, the pleasure and dissipation that fill their time, the prejudices and animosities that darken their outlook, the apathy and lethargy that paralyze their spiritual faculties. These are among the formidable obstacles that stand in the path of every would-be warrior in the service of Baha'u'llah. Obstacles which he must battle against and surmount in his crusade for the redemption of his own countrymen. To the degree that the home front crusader is himself cleansed of these impurities, liberated from these petty preoccupations and gnawing anxieties, delivered from these prejudices and antagonisms, emptied of self, and filled by the healing and the sustaining power of God, will he be able to combat the forces arrayed against him, magnetize the souls of those whom he seeks to convert, and win their unreserved, their enthusiastic, and enduring allegiance to the faith of Baha'u'llah. Citadel of Faith, page 148, if you want to go back and visit that list. Thank you very much, friends. Nice to see you this evening.
Anybody has questions for me? No. I guess we can have some questions, any comments the friends might have. I can pass the mic around if you want to ask the question. We'll probably keep it for about 10-15 minutes, I would say.
Yeah.
And go from there. Not too time.
If anybody, if you're all so satisfied and would rather go do something else, that's all right too.
Hi, my name is Dirk. I have a question, comment type of thing that I would like to ask you about. So, 22 years ago, so I was living in the apartment underneath Mr. Dunbar, and my aunt came to visit, and she's a minister. So she was then, and she still is now. And for most of my life, she was trying to pull me into her faith and her activities. So when she came here, I thought this is a chance for her to talk to Mr. Dunbar, and he can convince her that she's wrong. You know, essentially, I was 19 years old, and I thought that was what would happen. So she came, and she was there for a few days, and she had a time where Mr. Dunbar actually agreed to talk to her just in person, just the three of us. And what was surprising to me was that she attacked the faith for like an hour or an hour and a half, something like that. And Mr. Dunbar didn't say much of anything. And I was kind of disappointed because I thought you'd say more. But what I realized later was that her cup was full and that she needed to empty it a little bit. And so I don't know if you want to comment a little about that experience, to kind of remember that kind of environment. But I thought of it when you talked about teaching and about people's receptivity and how they, where they're coming from and their perspective.
I wish I could tell you I remember the incident, but I probably purposely forgot it. But I think that Abdu'l-Baha he gave us that example of listening to people who, you know, Howard Colby Ives talks about a few cases of, people who met Abdu'l-Baha, and he was so hopeful that they would receive what Abdu'l-Baha had to give, and instead they just spoke at him the whole time they were there and then left. And the master would usually just get up and give them a big embrace or something. In the case of one minister that had come and argued about that Christ is everything, that all we need, and so on and so on, Abdu'l-Baha, as he was getting up and leaving the room, he saw this huge bouquet of roses that somebody had brought for him. He lifted the roses up and put them in the man's arms. The man looked so startled. He carried the roses off. You have to, I think it's a very important point, we have to be good listeners. but you oftentimes you have a feeling that a person is receptive. You know right away that they're touched, even though they're arguing. They're touched. You know that they're arguing because they're feeling some pull from your direction, and it's disturbing their status quo, so to speak. So we don't need to be afraid of that, but we need to hear them out. It's very, very important. The last, Corinne True, she was the mother of the temple here, built the temple really with her power, her spiritual powers, and speaking to the friends about it and so on. A lot of the temples were built with a strong woman at the heart of the whole project. Very interesting. The Women of the Temple. That's a good book in case you haven't written. We don't have it written yet. You can read that. The Women of the Temples. So, in any case, she was with her daughters, who went on to become wonderful Baha'is, Catherine True and Edna True. And the last day they were with Abdu'l-Baha in 1909. This is just before he was released from his imprisonment in Akka. And he said he wanted to send them off with one last thought, and that is that they must see every soul that they meet in their lives as a letter from their beloved. Witness each soul and think of them as a letter from the beloved. There's something in this letter from the beloved for you to hear and to learn from this person. And no matter how soiled the envelope is, how dirty it is, how coffee spilled, stained it is, torn, your only thing you're interested in is in that message that's in that soul, that's in that message for you. And he said, think of the people that way when you go out. That's a lovely idea, Every soul has a set of divine attributes, different from every other soul. So you never discount that your person is less than that. You're a demonstration of the sovereignty of God and of a certain medley of divine attributes that nobody else expresses. Baha'u'llah quotes this in a letter in the Gleanings. He talks about how in the next world we will wish to witness the reality of every sanctified soul. The sanctified soul is the one whose set of attributes is shining. And that requires detachment and sacrifice and martyrdom, in the sense of spiritual martyrdom of one's own being, so that the being he has made you can be manifested. And then that becomes the source of another facet of looking at our beloved, looking at the Creator that's made us, because we see him in the faces of the others. Thank you. I think we said we try to get out of here by 9 o'clock, and it's getting pretty close. I wish you all the best in your services, in your meditations, in your sacrifices, and especially in your teaching.